He has done everything well. That's what the people had to say about Jesus after they saw him heal this deaf and man who was mute or could hardly speak in our gospel for today. He's done everything well, they said. That guy right there, he's got limitless power. He's got true power. He does everything well. I was thinking about power this week, and you take a moment, you think about power, and, well, it pops up in almost every story or movie that we generally like to read or watch. Power, right? And when you look and you see in all those stories and in all those movies, power, well, it can be used for good, but when it ends up in the wrong hands, it ends up often being the reason why there's corruption, why there's failure. You take a look about, you think about Star Wars for a second, and you think about Darth Vader. He didn't always used to be this bad guy. He was just a little kid, Anakin. He was noble. He was one of the most noble and gentle little children who was supposed to grow up to be this awesome Jedi, right? The one who could hold all that power. But then what happens? His desire for power consumes him. And he doesn't use it for, like, good purposes, but for selfish purposes. You think about Lord of the Rings. Think about Gollum. Before Gollum, he was just an ordinary creature. And then what happens? That desire for power consumes him. And this guy who's got this ring now refers to it as my precious. All he can do is think about that power that's now corrupted him. And then even Frodo Baggins, right? The one who was supposed to be the saving grace of the whole movie, right? Even him, he's corrupted by that power too. Power. Power has this thing about it. And these stories and these movies, they stick with us. They have us reflect on truths that we often see day in and day out. Power, when it's in the hands of human beings, it can corrupt. It's in movies, it's in stories, and we even see it in our own lives too. But Jesus, he's different. He can hold that much power. He does hold that much power, and think about what he uses it for. For good, for others, for salvation. Not for sinful purposes or selfish gain, but for his people that he loves. So much so that it gets to a point where everyone sees it and they say it themselves, right? He has done everything well. He's done everything well. Do you think they understood it? Do you think they understood that he really does do everything well? Like, do you think the people got it? Like, yeah, Jesus, he does everything well. In good times and in bad times, he is always doing everything well. He's great. It seems like they might have sort of understood that, just a little bit, because Jesus has been to this area of Gentile country before. He's been here before. The last time he was here, he removed demons out of this man, and the demons go flying off of a cliff, right? Into pigs. And then the people who see this, they saw Jesus here in the moment do this, and you know how they respond? Get out of here. They're begging and pleading with Jesus to just leave. Please. They're afraid. But now Jesus is back. He's back in the region of Decapolis, the same place that he was at before. And did you notice the same exact words? They're begging and they're pleading with him to stay because there's a guy who needs his help. See, Jesus, there's a man here. There's a man here who needs your help. He's deaf. He can hardly talk. Maybe, Jesus, maybe you could just put your hand on him. Maybe they thought that's all it took. Just a hand. Maybe they heard about the sick woman who, when Jesus showed up to town, all she had to do was touch the end of his cloak and she was healed. Maybe it can just be quick and easy, Jesus. Maybe you can just heal this guy, and then you can be on your way, right? The people knew that Jesus could change this man's life today. A man whose name isn't even mentioned. Did you catch that? There's one thing that everyone knew about him, is that that's the guy. That's the guy who's struggling with difficulties. He struggled his whole life. A man who today his ears are going to be able to hear perfectly. And today his mouth, his words, they're going to come out and he's going to be able to speak plainly. He does everything well. He has done everything well. But then I got another question. Do you think that this man, do you think he said those words the day before? Before he woke up today? Do you think he woke up saying, yeah, Jesus Christ, yeah. He has done everything well. He does everything well. Probably not. Probably not. I mean, can you imagine being deaf? Can you imagine being deaf and also not being able to speak well? We go through a lot of struggles and a lot of trials and a lot of temptations and a lot of suffering, and we also find ourselves complaining about a multitude of different things. But can you imagine life being completely just dark, silent, not being able to hear anything? Can you imagine not being able to communicate, not being able to express words and laugh in joyful moments over things said, or even share in the words of grief with someone that we love? Can you imagine that for a moment? It's a lot different than the weather not being so great on any given day. It's much different. This is different. What hope would you have? What joy would you have? God has done everything well? Probably not. We look around at life and, man, we do see suffering and we do see challenges everywhere. And all too often, it does seem, sometimes, at least to this human mind, to these human minds, to our minds, seems like God isn't doing anything well. Maybe like this deaf and mute man, you were born with a condition that affects you every single day. Maybe you were born healthy and there weren't many challenges, but then you were diagnosed with a condition that would later affect every single day of your life. Maybe you're completely healthy right now, and life seems like it's spinning out of control. Maybe things just seem chaotic. How many of us are just trying to make it through today? Or maybe just scratch that. Lord, scratch that. Not through today. Just get me through the next 20 minutes. Just get me through the next 20 minutes. Help me, Lord. Get me to tomorrow. Help me make it through tonight. I don't want to think about tomorrow. Maybe that's us right now. Maybe you can feel it in the pit of your stomach. Maybe the fear and the overwhelming thoughts and the worry and the stress is just piling up. God has done everything well. I don't know about that in my life. Sometimes it can feel like it's so overwhelming and it's so crazy that no one relates to it, that no one gets it, that no one knows how hard it is. But did you hear our first reading today? Do you remember it? It's Isaiah talking to the Israelites. And the Israelites, they know. They know. The Israelites know because their hearts were filled with fear and worry. These are the same Israelites who God did rescue out of Egypt. These are the same Israelites who God, time and time again, demonstrated his power and his glory and his saving for them. And these are the same Israelites who went off and decided to worship their own gods. And so what does God do? He lets them go off and do that. And he also allows the Babylonian country to come and take them captive. And so then, for the next 70 years, the Babylonian country would hold God's people in captivity. And the people who were fortunate enough to survive the rampage and the raid that came through, do you remember what they would say? We've looked at it before. They'd say things like, the Lord has forgotten us, the Lord has forsaken us. The Israelites know. They were hopeless, they were fearless. They knew what it was like to go through these things. They knew what it was like to go through challenges. And do you know who else knew? The guy in our second reading for today, he knew too. That guy who was lame from birth, being carried around, he was carried to the temple courts, and then they sit him down there to do what? To just beg for any sort of money so that he could live. Oh man, he knew what it was like to go through these things. Hopelessness, no joy. It seems like it's only filled with fear and worry. He knew what it was like to go through these things. It's not so different from us today. It's not so different from us today. We look around and we've got so many reasons to be filled with worry and to be filled with fear and to be anxious, to be overwhelmed with stress. And yet, what are we going to do about it? What do we do about it? Well, we can't do anything about it. And if we could, it would be terrible. It would be a terrible thing. Because if we're in charge of doing something about all that suffering, all that hardship, all that pain, then it only actually gets worse. Because that power, it corrupts us. It leads to selfishness and sinful gain. If it's left to us, it only gets worse. And if the Bible is clear and says so clearly that we are sinful by nature, if the Bible is clear, and it is spoken so clearly, that the world is full of the presence and effects of sin, then we need someone who's got power, who uses it for others for good. And he can. Jesus can. He does all things well. He really does. Today we get to simply just stand in awe of the fact that Jesus is the one with limitless power. And how amazing it is that he's the one. And we get to see that he's got a clear purpose for it too. It's for the good. It's for others. It's for salvation. That deaf and mute man, he probably didn't say those words when he woke up in the morning the day before. But man, he was going to say them every day afterwards moving forward. So much so that everyone was going to be looking around and saying, like, what's going on? What is he saying? Who is this person? He has done everything well. Jesus uses his power for us personally. He uses it passionately, and he also uses it perfectly. Right away, Jesus is personal about it. Did you catch what Jesus does? Of all the things that Jesus could do next, the moment that he's introduced to this man, he pulls him aside away from everyone else. Think about it. The only way that this guy was going to be able to communicate must have been through some sort of sign language, right? Because he couldn't use his ears. He couldn't use his mouth. And you think about all the commotion that would have been going on when everyone's like, Jesus, this guy, come on, we're watching. So what does Jesus do? He pulls him aside, just him and Jesus alone. And he looks at him, and he begins to touch, and he says, hey, this right here. I know what you've been struggling through your whole life. I know it, and I feel your pain. I'm going to fix it. And this right here, I'm going to take care of this. I know that's your struggle. I'm going to fix it. Jesus pulls this man aside. He draws his attention to all of it. And then what does he do? He looks up to heaven and he lets out a sigh. He groans. Ephatha. This is not the way it's supposed to be. You see Jesus groan, you see his sigh. And maybe it's Jesus just completely and simply sharing that he understands that it's not the way it's supposed to be. See, Jesus sees the sin, and he sees the presence and effects of it everywhere. He sees it brought into this man's life, and it's tragic in Jesus' eyes. It's tragic because he knows that this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Lord, when will this be over? It ends today. Jesus shows this man that he loves him personally by pulling him aside. And he also shows him that he loves him passionately. by looking at him eye to eye and letting him know that he wasn't insignificant, that he was important, and that he's going to take care of him. And then, to top it all off, Jesus, he loves him perfectly. Do you catch it? All it took was 2 words. 2 words. 2 words, and this guy's life changed dramatically. 2 words, be opened. God looks up, be opened. That's all it took. 2 words, and all of a sudden this man is able to hear everything. He's able to speak plainly, perfectly. 2 words, and this man's life changed forever. Can you even imagine how many words that this guy's probably had to say? I would just be babbling. He's praising God, giving glory to the one who does all things well, able to speak perfectly. So now I guess we get to just to think about that for ourselves. What about us? Is Jesus doing all things well for us? Is Jesus being personal and passionate and perfect with us? Yeah. You think about it, it took 2 words for that guy. And what do we have in front of us today? We've got those same words. The God, the creator of the universe, he used his word to create the world. He used that same word to wash us clean at baptism. He used that same word to give us his body and blood. That same word is used for our hearts on those days where it feels like everything is spinning out of control. That word is ours. You are not worthless. You are mine. I love you so much. He does all things well. And he's passionate about it too. Because where is Jesus when we're overwhelmed? Where is Jesus when we are stressed? Where is Jesus when life seems like it's spinning out of control? Where is Jesus when it seems like the presence and effects of sin are just creating chaos in our lives? Where is he? He's sighing and he's crying. He's aching and he's watching. He came down from heaven to the depths of the brokenness of this world to pray to his Father in heaven. And he dies on the cross for you and for me so that we could live a life with him forever in heaven. That's our God who loves us passionately, who loves us personally, and he also loves us perfectly too. He does all things well, so perfect that he gave up his own life for us. So perfect that not only did he care for this man's physical just challenges at the moment, but he cared for his life forever in heaven. So perfectly that he gives up his own life so that he could have life forever. That's our God who loves us perfectly too. That's our God who says, I will love you so much and I love you so much that I'm going to die for you. Because I can't imagine a life lived in heaven without you. Man, he really does do all things well. Sometimes it's hard for us to completely grasp that. It really is. Sometimes it's hard. It's hard to grasp it, that God is doing all things well. Sometimes we wait and wait and wait a long time before God can remove a challenge that is current in our lives. Sometimes God waits until we're in heaven to completely remove that. Is Jesus doing all things well then? Yeah, he is. He's doing all things well, perfectly, passionately, and personally, for you and for me. So let's take it all to him. He's got the power to take care of it. Let him be the one that's in control of all of it. He does all things well for us. Amen. This time I want to ask you all to please stand if you're able. We'll use the words of the Apostles' Creed to confess our faith with Christians across the world.